Hello all, welcome to Saturday the 13th of November, the day after the COP is supposed to have finished, with a wrap up that this was going to be an exciting time for us all and a new era of race to net zero. But hang on a second, we haven't yet finished the COP. As I've been trying to think about this during the course of the day, I've come up with this. This is the best I've come up with so far, which is, it's like watching the last season of Game of Thrones every year and thinking it's going to turn out better. This is day 13 of G'day Glasgow. My name is Andrew Petersen, CEO of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia, and welcome to this last program in this series. Let us begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the land, or this is being broadcast to you rather, from the land of the Camaragal people, and that we acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and particularly welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders who may be joining us today. Well, let's go straight to where we're supposed to be at. And what I'll do is I'll turn myself off. We're supposed to be here. Well, we're supposed to be not here. We're supposed to be all getting on planes and returning to our loved ones, cracking open champagne and talking about the success of another COP, but we're not there yet. And we're not there yet because they haven't yet decided on what they want to decide on, and more importantly, haven't yet decided what this COP actually means. On the screen, you'll see a very interesting table that was shared amongst the Twitter sphere in the last few hours as to where this particular COP lands when it comes to when it's going to end. My prediction is it'll be somewhere between, let's take a guess, of somewhere between number 14 and number 15. And perhaps, no, maybe I'm wrong. No, if it's more like Saturday and it's later, yes, it could be as late as Kyoto. So that's number 17. In terms of what's going on, I've broken up the barometer into three, and we won't go into any massive detail about this because we'll chat with our colleagues and our commentators very shortly, but it's true to say that they're not over the line, and they're not over the line in relation to Article 6, they're not over the line in relation to climate finance, they're not over the line in relation to transparency, they're not over the line in relation to this new narrative around urges and expects. I think that's the language, and that comes with its own interesting and perhaps hidden nuances. And you just get the feeling that somebody really needs to bash somebody's head around, and that would be the end to all of this uncertainty. But that's not where we're at. So number of issues still unresolved. Sorry, requests, not expectations. Now, there is a new section on loss and damage, which is exciting. It does include a call for industrializations nations to double adaptation finance by 2050. It does retain references to tackling emissions from fossil fuels, albeit now with new caveats. The wording on supposed unabated coal power and inefficient subsidies for fossil fuels interestingly mirrors that which was used in the G20 and the G7 agreements. And it does effectively challenge the coal industry to deliver carbon capture and storage or see coal power phased out. But will it remain in the final text? It does continue to call on governments to end subsidies, artificially reducing cost of fossil fuels, unless they have a clear social goal. But as I say, the talks on finance been still running around the clock, and they are not making any real progress. In terms of detail, we're seeing that the text instructs countries now to come back with stronger NDCs next year, although that's now being questioned. Interesting briefing given by our colleagues at WBCSD in the last 24 hours, indicating that the intervention of the US-China declaration, which doesn't have that expectation within it, may actually be the preferred view. Theirs is a review sometime not later than 2025, which aligns with current expectations under the Paris Agreement. And there are a lot of debates going on as to whether or not this particular inclusion of coming back every year now with your updated ambition is in fact unpicking the original agreement done in Paris. When it comes to financing, we're still seeing that there's an impasse in relation to how that's going to land itself. One of the interesting things I found, though, was that Iran has offered to ratify the Paris Agreement. So that will then leave, I think, literally a handful of countries that have not yet signed the pact. Overnight, France, Belgium, and Sri Lanka, the first Southeast Asian country to have joined the pledge to end fossil fuel financing by 2022. We're still waiting for this mechanism by which rich countries and companies buy emissions reductions in poor countries. In other words, the rules around Article 6 still has not yet landed. In fact, may now not land, which is very much different to the narrative occurring a few days ago. And then, of course, the big question of whether or not we're going to keep the goal of 1.5 alive is arguably no longer in debate, but the question is it going to be, as we heard last night from Maria Mendeluce, on life support, or is it actually going to start looking as though it's got robust health and can come out of triage? That's very much open to debate. So without further ado, let's now welcome into the room, the chat room, Tina Perinotto from the Fifth Estate and Rachel Alembakis from FS Sustainability, and I will check through our attendees. There he is. I knew he'd be there. Murray Hogarth from Wattwatchers to join us in a conversation about this particular COP. Welcome to all three of you. Thank you so much for joining us on a Saturday. I'm sure this is exactly what you wanted to be doing right at this moment, but God willing and weather permitting, you've actually got alcohol in your hand, so it should make at least the discussion a little easier to actually handle. Let me first ask you all, where's my questions? Yes. Now, we'll get to the issue of the final text. Oh, no, before I do, people, and Murray will definitely appreciate this, as will probably Tina. This is my T-shirt from COP6, 2000. Whoa.
It's a classic.
It's a classic, much like its wearer, can I say? Much like its wearer. Although, like the T-shirt, it's a little frayed around the edges and probably should be thrown in the bin. Moving right along. So, we'll get to the final text in a minute and talk about that and its implications, not just for the world, but certainly for Australia. But give us your first thoughts on the COP to date. Why don't we start with the elder statesman first, Mr. Murray Hogarth. Murray.
It feels a bit familiar. You know, my perspective is I was a journalist and went to COP3, Kyoto, all those years ago, filled with expectation. And, you know, it's sort of, we're still strolling towards Armageddon as a human species. I was trying to do sort of thinking of a breakdown of the history of these things, you know, nearly 30 years since the Rio Earth Summit, which started all in 1992. All of these COPs, I think, maybe three really memorable ones that, you know, Kyoto and Paris because they produced significant outcomes, and Copenhagen because it was such a disaster. But it's 18 years between Kyoto and Paris, and we're another 6 years on now. So, and sort of like an old tape being played again. So I'm a bit underwhelmed, I guess.
Yeah, I reflected today, hey, I've sired a child, raised them, put them through primary, secondary, high school and university, and is out earning a crust in that period of time. What's the world done for me? You know, that kind of that kind of thinking. Tina, what's your take so far?
Oh, look, I do appreciate the cynicism, and there's a lot of reason for really strong cynicism. But I've actually been quite surprised at the the sort of the mood around the world, not so much, you know, whatever comes out of COP in necessarily in agreements. I'm not sure. I think that is important, but I'm not sure that that's the main game, you know, in terms of our global ambitions, because I've just been absolutely a bit gobsmacked by the momentum that we've seen around this COP that to me is, you know, much bigger than, I mean, I haven't been to any of the COPs. I'm only sort of sitting as an outsider. But I think, you know, it seems like the whole world is shifting and it's been building momentum. But since, you know, since COVID ended in Australia, you know, just the last month, everything seems to have changed. And you know, and you've got these big announcements from, you know, big companies that have come out. I'm not saying it is from COP, it's around COP, you know, and Morrison looking so bad, you know, going there, like it's a huge embarrassment. So he quickly is starting to roll out, you know, programs, you know, for sustainability. You probably want to go into more details about that later, you know, but 500 million for the CEFC, but, you know, he wants it to include clean clean storage, you know, and
carbon capture and storage, yeah.
Yeah, clean capture and storage. But they've got to change the legislation to get that through. So, you know, CEFC, they've tried to kill many times and they can't. So, you know, he's starting to really, I think, set himself up on a path to an election. And he's going to, I can see him starting to win a lot of votes with his middle ground, you know, supporters that have really disliked him not doing anything about climate. And now he's starting to look like he is. And whether it's real or not, we're going to have to keep a real, you know, very tight look on him, at him. And then there's, you know, financiers, there's Jeff Bezos the other day with $2 billion. Well, so what out of 200 billion, but at least it's something. And so what compared to the damage that he does to human beings and, you know, modern slavery, God knows what else he's involved in, you know, and the planet, you know, with all the stuff. But I actually think that there's a momentum, and people have, ever since the IPCC came out with the 1.5 degree code red, we just keep using that theme now, code red. This is it, you know. And I think there's a feeling that this is, you know, quite serious, and you're getting very senior business people and financiers starting to say we need to care about the climate, we need to care about nature, which I've not heard before.
Rachel, you've been writing furiously, as has Tina, about this over the last few days / now 2 weeks. Gosh, time flies when you're having exhaustion. What's your take thus far of the COP?
Well, while fully acknowledging what Murray was saying about, you know, this, we're sort of slouching our way towards Armageddon, I'd like to paraphrase Barack Obama paraphrasing Joe Biden and say, don't judge this COP against the almighty, judge it against the alternative. I'll take all of us back to October 2020. And would any of us been 100% confident this time last year that we would be back, that the United States would be back at the table of the Paris Agreement, and that the US government and China would be issuing a joint declaration?
That's the other big one.
This is a disappointing COP because we feel the fierce urgency of now, but on the other hand, there's been so many commitments, and I think, as Tina was saying, just ahead of momentum around the world. But I think there's a lot to take from it, and of course, we still haven't seen the final declaration. And in sort of observing, you know, political movements, multilateral negotiations, and participating in a few in my time, the longer that things go on, the less likely it is that the least common denominator will triumph. None of us were happy with the draft agreement, I think, but there's still time to, you know, have something that comes up that's a bit stronger.
Yeah, so let's deal with the text in 2 parts. The first is the substance of the text, and the second, and I think both Tina and Rachel have highlighted this, and that's the observation of everybody else other than the parties and the tragics in the world who follow as observers what goes on at the COP. The simple fact that we're all watching and wanting to know what's going to be the outcome. It seems to be, if not number one, on every single online major news outlet this afternoon. It's certainly in the top 3. And I couldn't imagine that being in the top 5, say 2, 3, 5 years ago. So let's deal with text first. Observations, we'll go to Tina first. Observations thus far around what's in there, what surprised you? Disappointed you is always an easy one to ask you, but what has surprised you so far about what you're hearing about what's in the text?
Oh, look, I don't think I'm the right person to ask for the details of what's in the text, because I'm kind of doing a whole lot of other stuff. We've had blogs coming through. Damien's been covering stuff from London and that. So, I mean, our little team, I did ask them what they thought. And Poppy thought the big one was the pledge to end deforestation by 2030.
Yeah.
I thought that was really big and very important. And also the pledge to cut methane by 30%, which is really good. So these people are reading things more closely than I am, but and Damien's come through with some fantastic, really fun blogs, which has sort of turned it into. He's moved over to London now, so he's picked out quite a few interesting things that that's what I've got here. There's probably a whole lot of others that are really important.
Well, that's an interesting observation, if I can, to use a segue for the conversation about the text, because the question's being asked, if there's so many pledges, so many announcements, so much collateral activity that's outside of the Paris Agreement itself, how is it going to be brought into and operationalised around the obligations under the Paris Agreement? And more importantly, the big question that's now being asked, great, you've got those pledges, and they all seem to start with Glasgow, which is helpful. But how are they going to then filter down into the nationally determined contributions? In other words, the ambition of every single country. Rachel, I do want to sort of deep dive into this surprising element around the text, because there are a lot of surprises thus far around the fact that there is a call out in relation to coal. There is a call out in relation to I've forgotten what I was going to say, but just the sheer fact that the text seems to be sufficiently heroic at the moment. Yes, it will be neutered, certainly watered down, but do you take any comfort from what you've seen thus far, even though there is a lot of critics and on both sides about what the text ultimately will contain?
I do take a lot of comfort, and again, it's not just because I'm a cheerful optimist by nature, but because in the reporting that I've been doing, which has been trying to get behind the headlines and find out what the impact is going to be for the members of my readership, which tends to be in the investment industry, what they're saying to me is that they didn't have big expectations for COP26 in terms of hard targets. And so they're pleased on the upside with that. So, for example, I talked with Clearbridge Investments, which is a listed infrastructure investment manager. And their co-founder, Nick Langley, told me that he found what's happened at COP26 has done nothing to change the directionality of their investment. And they've invested with climate change as central to their considerations. So for him, it's built more momentum. He called out methane as being one of the more significant developments for his portfolio. And he said, his investment firm has already looked at fugitive emissions as being sort of a key point of engagement, and particularly talking with like pipeline operators, for example. So for a lot of the investment community, it didn't need to be perfect to continue to give those directional signals around the shifting of capital. We would all like a clear roadmap with hard numbers and hard targets. But in the absence of that, no ballast weight does allow capital to continue to shift. Again, not as quickly and as urgently as we know the science tells us, but it's not going to slow down.
Yeah. Okay. So no real need for that North Star. The North Star is to a certain extent there, and everybody's heading towards it. The question is, are we heading there rapidly enough? Murray, let's tap into your community, and you are the fortunate recipient of the blessed undertakings. Gosh, where am I going with this? Of the most holy and blessed Natalie Isaacs, who is, a living legend, as we all know. What is she telling you about what's going on at the moment? Is she hopeful? Because gender and youth, and again, this is what surprised me about this COP. They have been talked about front and centre. There was a whole discussion in the last 36 hours, for example, about the importance that STEM in a decarbonised world is going to have a gender lens to it. I cannot recall a single COP where that has been as a front-ended item being talked about. What are you hearing from Natalie, if you're hearing anything at all?
So, yes, Natalie, my wife, founder and driving force of 1 Million Women, the Women's Climate Action Movement. And I feel like I've been living COPs vicariously through her for over a decade now, because she goes to them and I don't. I look after the dogs. But I picked her up from the airport last night. She got back from Glasgow, having gone there at really short notice when COVID opening up allowed. And, you know, well, what I learned as a reporter trying to do COPs is it's very hard. They're probably the last people who know what's going on are the people who are there trying to work out all the moving parts. And, you know, her immediate sort of thing on landing was that she was pretty despondent that it wasn't going to achieve its outcomes. And that said, she was living the kind of passion and change that Tina and Rachel have referred to, and that while there, and, you know, doing everything from walk-ups on Australian ministers to talking with inspirational women like Mary Robinson, you know, who was the first president of Ireland, and marching with radical feminists, something which I think I'm unlikely to ever do a lot of. And, you know, there is this, you know, there's this feel that the world can't wait. But, you know, when I look at it on the text itself, if I understand it correctly, you know, it's one of the key sticking points now is 6 years after Paris, still trying to corral people into hard agreement around 1.5 with targets that'll go to it and that. So, you know, I'm clearly COP skeptical, but I'm not a total skeptic. I think they serve a purpose, and the way they focus media attention and, you know, world attention once a year, and that is a good thing. I think it's it's incredibly important that you see different societal players at work, and you see the developing world and, you know, the home for the equity issues and those sorts of things. But I guess, yeah, Natalie's sitting there today trying to make sense of it and, you know, waiting for some kind of outcome that might bolster her spirits. Yeah.
I think.
And wrestling jet lag.
Yeah, well, as Claire O'Neill from WBCSD said last night, please leave healthily, because I've already got the Glasgow lurgy. And I was like, oh dear, that's not good. Is that a new Delta variant of COVID? Let's not go there. All right, so I was going to pick up on the point around, I know where I was going. Yes, Australia. We have to talk about Australia. We've studiously avoided a deep dive into Australia's role at this particular COP. Let me start from the outset by saying they delivered brilliantly, because for the first time since 1996, there was a pavilion. And most importantly, that pavilion had, according to all accounts that I have read, including feedback from our colleagues at WBCSD on the ground, Australia, without doubt, had the best coffee on the pavilion. So if this is going to be a coffee-led COP outcome, then Australia leads. In all other respects, though, I suspect you would have seen that in the last few hours, they were awarded the colossal fossil, if I understood it correctly. And very helpfully, Mary Stewart, who's actually on the line watching this at the moment, would be putting into the chat function every day, Australia got another fossil. And I think we scored 5 plus now the colossal fossil. That's enough intro. Rachel, your take on where Australia played a role in this COP?
I feel the weight as the immigrant in this conversation, not to offend my host country, which I've come to love so much. I'll go back with another quote. When Ross Garnaut issued his final report in 2011, he said something that I've just loved and treasured so much ever since, when he said that he didn't believe that Australia was a pissant nation when it came to climate. And I feel that there's a massive gulf between the amount of leadership that various sectors in Australia show when it comes to climate action, whether it's in business, whether it's investment, are shining examples on academics and science, and the presence of Indigenous voices who may not have been formally invited but went to participate, people in the streets with the youth. It's not matched by the ambition of the government, and that's a sadness to me. I'll be perfectly frank on that. It's a real sadness to me, because for any number of reasons, Australia, has the resources to be a net zero leader in the world. And it's a disappointment not to see that happen. And perhaps I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Tina, you highlighted Australia's run to the finishing line in relation to the release of the Australian Way. I have read that it's been akin to somebody getting their homework in a year 12 assignment at the very last minute, and it's a very ordinary installation. And if they'd actually applied themselves over the last 2 years, they could have actually done a lot better. Thoughts?
About Australia, well, I just have to read this bit out from Damien's blog. He said, just like an addict needs to reach rock bottom before they can turn their life around, Australian leaders seem to be finally waking up as Australia drops to last in the Climate Change Performance Index, actually last 64 out of 64 countries. So, you can't, maybe we are like addicts. We've been addicted to coal. That's been pretty obvious. And it is like an addiction. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any logical sense. The whole country's against it. One of the stories that keeps popping, that rises to the top all the time is when we do, stories about surveys of public sentiment towards sustainability. So while the federal government steadfastly is determined to throw the rest of us under a bus for the sake of a tiny coal industry in terms of numbers, not wealth, where the rest of the country seems to be doing as much as they can. Like New South Wales is unbelievable. A liberal state is now challenging the federal government and saying, you can do better, we're doing better. Victoria's trying hard, and even Queensland, although it's so hard to get, if there's any Queenslanders reading, please can you open your, communication channels and start talking to people. I cannot believe how hard it is to get good information out of Queensland. It seems to be like a tight sort of black box up there. And we hear that they're doing good things, but it's just hard to identify. We get journalists to go and do stories about what the sentiment is, what the government's doing, and you're getting mean little bits of information, but I think they're doing better than we think. So you've got the states around the country, and even South Australia, doing fantastic work. And now the latest news from Scott Morrison saying it's got to be business led, but we don't have to do anything. You guys are doing fine already, so just go ahead and you save the day. And also he's obviously talking to the other states. So it's a really weird game. I don't understand how he can be so stubborn and so determined to protect a tiny cohort of people.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you raised that, because it does. I will be public about this. It does stick in my craw that he said that over the last few hours, or whenever he said it, yesterday or today, particularly as there is no appetite by any country, including Australia, to include into the text the role of the private sector. So, and there was in the original non-paper, so the paper you have when you don't actually have a paper, which came out, Wednesday, there was actually text suggested that there would be an acknowledgement that the role of the private sector in this was to further the aims and objectives of the overall Paris Agreement, right? It would be the first time, as I understand it, that there would be reference to that particular item. But no amount of effort by Women Business Coalition and its partners, including the WBCSD and including International Chamber of Commerce, to have this language in there, which business wants in there. This is what I don't understand. including Australia not taking a position by allowing that text in there. It just frustrates me to then see our Prime Minister say, oh, well, it's now business-led. Well, okay, but give us the apparatus and the capacity to be included in the solutions going forward. I'm going to stop ranting and go over to Murray to sort of offer up a slightly different view, which is you've been to one since COP3. Is it ever thus? And are we just talking about an inability of policymakers in this country over the last 25 years, as Tina says, to get away from this addiction, and that there really needs to be some sort of philosophical cold turkey around the political class, and we're not just talking about the current government, we're talking about all shades and forms, that this country needs to be fit for future purpose, not for the thing that's going to get us through the next quarter.
I think, like, if anybody thinks that Australia goes to these things to show environmental leadership, they clearly haven't been watching, because I can't speak for COPs 1 and 2, but by COP 3, Australia had settled in, this is not about the environment for us, this is about trade and economic factors, and, you know, we're going to fight tooth and nail. And it, you know, feels to me like that's been the same ever since. I don't sort of even aim at particular parties or that. It's a failure of our political class. And, you know, when Tina mentioned New South Wales, I agree that, you know, in Matt Keane, Treasurer and Minister for Energy and Environment, now we may be seeing the kind of politician we've been waiting for, a 21st century politician who gets sustainability. We kind of thought Malcolm Fraser as Prime Minister might be that guy too, but that didn't play out. Malcolm Turnbull didn't play out. So
wow, that's impressive.
There's kind of a tragedy in this. It's like, you know, the first rule of Fossil Club is you can't talk about the good things that happen in our climate world. And, you know, so because the politicians at the federal level really don't own those good stories, the incredible rooftop solar story in Australia, some, you know, wonderful stuff in business like our commercial building sector and that Tina knows so well. These sort of things have happened in spite of them. And, you know, it's a shame, but somehow we need a decoupling from our past, and we've got to work out a way to get there with the politicians that we need for the 21st century.
That was a beautiful segue to the next question, which was, using my Game of Thrones metaphor at the top end, should the world actually stop binge watching this show, the COP, and just get on with how to decarbonise our society, and actually leave the policymakers to argue about what's going to go into the script and who should be the lead actors in this ongoing farce? That's a fairly dramatic way of putting it. But there's an argument that's going around at the moment that, yes, the COPs will still need to be there because you'll have to have the parties directed over time towards making sure that what's done is done in a coordinated fashion. But realistically, and I think you've all three of you have pointed to this, we seem to have come to this COP at an inflection point where society has gone, enough is enough, we're taking the reins and we're going to see it get done. And the biggest change that's been observed is that business itself wants to be part of that change agency. Discuss. So let's go with Tina first.
Okay, definitely. I think business is actually starting to see, you know, I actually personally, I don't care what the reasons are as long as they're doing the right thing. And, you know, the thing that's driving them is money. You know, my cat's getting in the way. So money is the thing. They're seeing, you know.
My first meme. I haven't had one. I'm so excited.
Come and say hello to all the guests. Come on. She likes a bit of a show, so she'll come in a minute. No, but I really think, you know, there's when I saw Coles put an ad on the TV, I watch SBS, you know, and they said, you know, zero waste, zero energy, zero hunger. I went, what is going, that is to me a dramatic statement that things are changing. And I mean, the thing that really got me is the zero hunger. So they're actually channeling the SDGs, and not just something that appeals to their customers direct. They're starting to sense, and these people are important. We follow them a lot, Woolworths and Coles, because they must spend squillions on marketing. So they know the sensitivity and the nuanced, thinking of their customers, who are the consumers and the voters of Australia, So I think it's really, really important what those people do. And the big companies are now starting to use a climate and purpose, agenda to sell their products. And I think that signals that, everyone wants to be, they may not do it right, they may be, greenwashing, but there's also the rise of the greenwash police. We're getting some really strong,
We absolutely are. And I actually think the single biggest outcome of this COP is the announcement of the International Sustainability Standards Board, because that's the COP who's going to be the COP over the COP. In other words, that they're going to be there to regulating that greenwashing in the private sector, and uphold the assurance and the underlying accountability of business action in the race to net zero. And that's just fantastic. It's going to create markets. It's going to create enthusiasm, ambition, action, so much that, no single government, or for that matter, it would seem 195 of them being able to get together, has been able to do thus far. Rachel, thoughts?
Look, we can't stop paying attention to COP until I've at least had an opportunity to go to a COP and cover it.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yes, no, COPs must continue to be important.
Well, in addition to the announcement that Egypt is got COP26, 7, I'm sorry, they've announced that COP28 is going to be held at the United Arab Emirates, which is, at least it's warm.
Yes. Well, look, they were the first.
Circling Saudi Arabia.
Yes, possibly. Sorry.
I believe the announcement said that the UAE was the first Middle Eastern country to ratify Paris. So, balancing, that's a good acknowledgement there from that perspective. It's, clout chasing and headline chasing aside, I think, as always with everything in this place, it's a yes and a no. Obviously, action will continue outside of the singular 2-week bubble that we create around COP every year. And that's a good thing, because the negotiators, these details take time to hammer out and get everybody on board and create something that's durable, robust, and transparent. By that same token, to see world leaders together and to see the leaders who are acting versus the leaders who aren't acting, it can be clarifying. Scott Morrison's speech really has to be beheld against the context of COP26 to be perceived and believed. But then I go back to particularly around Article 6. One area where I think Australia does have reason to be proud of itself potentially, or to take note of, around Article 6. Yes, the details are being hammered out and it's messy, but at the same time, the Indo-Pacific announcement gained its first 2 international partners in Fiji and Papua New Guinea.
The offset mechanism. Absolutely.
Offsetting mechanism. And, so that'll join the one that Switzerland has done with Ghana, Senegal, Dominica. I've got the list of countries if anybody wants to hear it. So again, the top line negotiations will drag on and will be done in the wings while the stage is occupied by big statements. But on the side, there is action that is happening that is meaningful to keep track of as well.
And Murray, your wife is a one person force of nature causing all this to
my
change.
Once a journalist, now actually working in a company in business, in technology. The decade or two after Kyoto depressed me so much that I had to get out of the carbon policy world entirely, and I now go around describing myself as an eco-techno-optimist.
I like that.
So it's where you draw your optimism from. So what do I think? I think COP is a necessary thing, and we need it to keep herding the cats towards the direction. I think net zero is the right target as a kind of baseline, as a minimum of where we want to get to to 2050, but I think it's the wrong thing as the aspiration. And I think, you know, you get all these arguments about law of diminishing return as you try to get down to a zero target or that. It's not particularly inspiring and motivating. Technologies, the flow of global capital in particular is going to be, you know, crucial to us getting there faster. And we need those sort of targets like 1,000% renewables, the big uplifting stuff to move the world. And, you know, there should be no underestimating what a massive thing it is to change the, you know, whole economy and the energy economy of a world in a limited period of time. But we, you know, we need real inspiration, aspiration. So we need the leaders to get us there. And we're not in that place at the moment where, you know, we're focused on the problem and arguing about, you know, how close to zero can you realistically get by this year or that year. And, you know, the world needs more than this to, you know, really make things happen. And we can do it. The money's there, the technologies are there. You know, it's just this willpower and a determination and a excitement around change, I suppose, that we need to capture.
Last question, and I thank the audience, albeit small but perfectly formed, and they're hanging in there. So last question, and it's a variation on the question I asked last night and the night before to our COP stars. The variation on the question is this. Imagine that Monday, you get on the bus and coming into the city for a meeting for whatever purpose. Assuming, Rachel, you're allowed to leave. Thank you. Okay. Rachel's in Melbourne.
I can.
She's very excited. All right. So you're allowed to go on the bus, get into town. And while you're on the bus, there's a business person that just happens to sit next to you. And for some reason, you are reading something about COP. And that business person who's, as I said before, is over 50, he's a male, and he's an over 50-year-old male. So you know where that comes from. Says to you, oh, what's this COP thing? And is it something I have to worry about in my business? What would you tell that person? Why don't we start with Murray first?
I'd tell them that this is opportunity for better, you know, lower cost electricity, a better way of living for themselves, a more prosperous and fair society in which they can do better business. And I would definitely be trying to, you know, appeal to their personal, but also their business and healthy capitalist desire to be in a market like that. And, you know, point to the things that, you know, any assumption that we can keep going the way we are is very flawed.
Tina, what would you say to that person?
I'd ask them where they've been living, under a rock. You know, seriously, I think they should, you know, if they want to survive in the real world, they need to know what COP's about. They need to know our biggest challenges and what people are saying, that this is the biggest business opportunity, let alone, you know, the fact that we have to do it to survive. So there's two giant forces, you know, and we may not get there. I know that. But I actually want to sort of, you know, 2050, who cares about 2050? It's too late. Most people won't even be around that are, you know, writing the agreements. We sort of want to focus on 2030. I'm kind of all about that. So our new event that we've got, the 23rd of November, come along everyone, it's called on eco-proptech. We've called it Moonshot 2030. And Moonshot, I thought it was a bit of a funny thing, and the young designer said, what does that mean? I said, you know, Jack Kennedy. What? Who's he? You know,
you're asking young people to remember back to 1969.
Yeah,
Hello.
and Jason Falinsky, actually, the MP, sort of, you know, picked me up on, you know, LinkedIn and said, oh, Tina, you're saying that we've got to get to net zero by 2030. How is that possible? I said, well, you know, what Churchill said, it's not how can we afford, you know, can we afford to save England? from the Second World War. Can we, do we have enough money? Do we have no, you just have to do it. It's whatever it takes. There isn't actually a budget. How much will it cost? What a ridiculous question.
Yeah.
It's whatever it costs.
Love it. And Rachel, final word from you.
Oh, look, how could I not agree more with what Tina and Murray have already said? But I introduced it if I was speaking to a 50-year-old who did not happen to know a young person. I would say, how do you expect to hire anybody? Who do you expect your customers to be? And how do you expect your investors to respond? I think, the twin forces of climate change and 18 months of being locked down has generated a class of people who've done a hell of a lot of research and know where they want their money going and are very, very interested in putting it that way. Beautiful.
Sorry, the cat could not resist any longer.
Yes, I've got a cat meme.
You are famous.
I have hit Nirvana. What can I say? Look, thank you very much. And as we're winding up, I wanted to share this with you all, including our studio audience. Anybody know what this figure is?
Average number of steps per day of the average coffee.
Oh,
Coffees served at the Australian Pavilion.
Good. All very good answers.
I've got no idea.
Not accurate, but all good answers. No, are you ready? Oh,
yeah. Liters of death. Oh, that's terrible. Their skin.
I had to end on a
I'm just thinking about the water filtration.
Oh, don't. Oh. Anyway.
I hope you can get into the whiskey water.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So I need to thank so many people for what was a very interesting experiment over the last 14 days. That is it for the COP26 program. Thank you so much to our supporters, Women Business Coalition, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, Business for Nature, and the Climate Disclosure Standards Board. Thank you, speakers all. We've had over 30 speakers over the last 13 days, and most of them have joined us just before 7 a.m. each morning over the last 12 days, and they've given very freely of their time. And more importantly, I think their insights and their impressions of the highs and lows of what is a seminal conference, despite how I may have opened this. A big thank you to our COP head of delegation at Glasgow, Matthew Warnken, for his tireless support and engagement on the program over the course of the last 2 weeks. We are really hoping that he's going to get a good rest on his return to Australia. A big shout out to Lee Murray, who has actually been the communications eyes, ears and hands, working to deliver this daily information on our LinkedIn page, on our website, and of course, keeping you all informed of the background to each and every speaker through the chat function, and keeping our members up to date on the resources that have been available throughout the last 2 weeks. And of course, thank you to our audience. Across the webinars and the YouTube, and you can see on the screen, I hope, our YouTube page, we think we've had about 2,000, almost 2,000 participants over the last 12 days. We did our homework and we weren't really aware of anyone having tried something like this before. We will be sending you a follow-up email in the next few days to everybody who registered, whether you watched online or watched later. And we would really appreciate if you could complete the survey about what you thought of the program, what worked, what can be done better, because we're planning to repeat this approach in 2022 in one form or another across other major sustainability gatherings to give you a better understanding, and we hope further engagement with these particular events. Now, don't forget, if you're a BCSD Australia member, the outcomes of the COP will be uploaded into your daily briefing and sent to you via your insider newsletter on Monday morning, along with access to the now over 300-page COP background and daily reports, which will be also filed into our Knowledge Exchange, which is our online member resource hub for future reference. There'll also be a wrap-up and synthesis report that will be coming through to all BCSD Australia members from the WBCSD right throughout the network. And finally, if you haven't already booked your post-COP business implications briefing with my good self, you can do so by emailing us at BCSDAustralia at BCSDA at bcsda.org.au. But for now, as I have said every night, bar one, respect the science, respect nature, and please respect each other. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Andrew Petersen. Goodbye for now.